So the storage on my phone is full, so this is my third time filming this, so whatever version you get for the intro is pretty much the one that I finished filming at the end of my patients. But regardless, this is a tool review for the AtomStack Laser. I've done a couple of these on the video, on the channel. The main difference between this and other tool reviews is this laser I'll be giving away to someone who I guess technically you won't even have to watch the video the way I'm doing it, but that is the plan. This is not any sort of spam or anything like that. I am getting these lasers in order to do reviews. That is fulfilling my part of the obligation with the companies that are giving them to me, and I just don't need a bunch of them. And I'd rather someone, to be perfectly honest, I'd rather someone like myself who probably couldn't afford this without a company giving it to them, and who is a tinkerer or a woodworker and wants to make some cool stuff, gets it. So that is basically what I'm hoping happens. As far as the contest, I'm going to have official rules in the description. I implore everyone to read those. The big points I want to get across is that YouTube is not associated with this contest whatsoever. The company that gave this to me, you're supposed to mention that they're sponsoring the giveaway, but technically they didn't give this to me for a giveaway. They gave it to me for a tool review video, but regardless, I will mention the company AtomStack and the laser. The other thing, which I actually feel pretty terrible about, is I'm making this only available for people in the United States. That is because I am paying for the shipping in order to get it to whoever wins. And I have mailed stuff overseas before. One of the things I mailed last was a very small picture frame to France, actually, and it was like $50. So I just think the shipping on this is just going to be way too much to send it overseas. And I know the voltage and the outlets might be an issue overseas as well. I'm sure there's converters and ways around that, but mainly because of the shipping costs, I won't be doing that. Now, have at least 2 more lasers that I'm going to do reviews on, as well as giveaways. So if someone, because I know there's a lot of people on the channel that I talk to every week in other countries. So if someone could think of a clever way around that, I've tried, and I wouldn't mind doing that if it's not going to cost me a fortune. But those are the main things. But in general, this is going to be a tool review video. I don't get too much into testing the lasers. They all pretty much perform. And this is my 4th one I've tested, but the 3rd video I'm making, and they all perform very similarly. I mean, things are going to cut a little bit faster, a little bit slower. The details on certain lasers are a little crisper, but in general, if you put multiple engravings next to each other, I don't think you'd be able to tell much of a difference. I think the big thing with these lasers, which I'll keep updated on the lasers I'm keeping, on these ones I'm giving away, obviously I won't be able to do that, but I think the biggest thing on these lasers is going to be the longevity of them. And they haven't been around long enough, and there's they update them so regularly that I think there's not a lot of information out there on exactly how long the laser module lasts, which I think is going to be an important point for people. But like I said, the main thing I'm going to do is, I believe there's a program that will randomly pick a comment on the video, so I think you'll have to leave a comment in order, but this will all be in the rules, in order to enter the contest. But that will be the extent of it. You won't even have to subscribe to the channel. And then as far as the build project for this, I was pretty happy with how it turned out. I made these kind of light boxes of sorts. I'm still kind of playing around with veneer and how the laser cuts veneer, and light kind of being able to go through the veneer. Not only showed a design, but also the grain, because it's so thin. These machines cut veneer really well. I wouldn't say these are prototypes. They're a little bit beyond prototypes, but I don't know if they're finished pieces. But they will light up, and obviously you're not going to be able to see this as well in person on the camera, but I do have some shots of them with the lights out, and they are pretty cool. But I also wanted them to stand alone as I guess, objects of art, if you will, so that they weren't just lighted boxes, but they could also function as something like a nightlight or whatnot. But the possibilities are fairly endless with these lasers. I still haven't even come close to exhausting what they can do. So that is basically what this is going to be. This is what this is going to look like. I'm obviously going to have to take this apart to mail it, but I'm going to try and keep as much of it as possible together. This one has this little disc that you use for the height adjustment. I don't love this. A lot of these have separate little pieces you use to get the height adjustments. It's not my favorite just because I'm a loser of things, but it does work. It's a little plastic piece that gives you the right depth working off of the material you have. Now this one did not have any sort of hookup for the air pump that I have in my shop, but this company, as far as I can tell, does sell those. I'm going to recommend for anyone that gets this to have an air pump. It just gives you a crisper engraving as well as venting in the shop. So the first thing I'm doing with these is I'm doing a cut test. I bought this cut test off of Etsy. If you watch any of these laser videos I do this with all the pieces. I mostly am cutting through material that's about 1/4 inch thin and thinner, so I don't mess around with anything much thicker at this point. I might down the road, but honestly, 1/4 inch veneer, 1/4 inch plywood is pretty abundant in my shop, so that is what I've been using. This is an example of something I've had before, and I'm trying to keep these samples so I can compare and contrast these lasers, so you could see some of these cut tests on some of these other ones I had. And then I've also found out through this process that lasers do not like Luan. I've had lots of burning issues with lasers, so this hard oak and this hard maple are the ones that they cut the best. So you kind of see the test cut I did for this laser did not go all the way through. So I was a little concerned about that at first, but you will see that I think maybe one of my settings was messed up at this point, because this ends up cutting material quite well. So then what I usually do with these is I try the engraving, and I do my logo. This one came out really washed out. I have no clue why. So this particular laser has a touchpad. These touchpads are actually pretty nice. The first one I tested with this, I didn't think I would use it much, but they're actually pretty handy for getting the laser in position and changing some settings. So they had some pre-uploaded files that I could access through this touchpad. So in order to rule out there being an issue with the laser versus light burn, what I did was I engraved one of their pre-printed patterns. Now you'll also see later in the video I screw all this stuff down because the laser kicked up into my plywood, because especially organic materials, as you're cutting them with these lasers, they do want to bend. But so even though that looked messed up, that was accurate. And then I went through and changed some settings in light burn, and I was able to quickly engrave this piece. So I was able to change some more settings and then engrave it again. So you could see all the lasers I've tested. They all look pretty similar now. Some are going to be a little bit darker than others just because of settings. But basically what the problem was is light burn sometimes changes my settings, and I had to just go back and set everything to a default setting, and it worked fine. So to do some test runs with this and cutting, this is actually going to be for another project I'm thinking of doing, but I need to cut out a bunch of pieces, so I figured why not try it with this. So I wasn't expecting much after I showed you the test cut I did, but I have a suspicion after watching back this, which is one of the benefits to recording everything, watching this back, that all of the settings in light burn were a little off because I just done an update. That's my best guess. So like I said, I wasn't expecting much, so I kind of plugged some numbers I've been using into this. All of these lasers are going to be a little bit different as far as speeds and power, so you do want to kind of play around with stuff before you cut something that you want to keep. But you could see this gear actually cut really well. So like I said, this will cut through 1/4 inch without a problem. I think this was only a couple passes and it cut through really nicely. So
those are the two main tests I'm doing for all of these. See if they engrave, see if they can cut. After that, it's is where longevity comes into play. If it can engrave my logo and cut these gears, it's going to be able to do just about anything. So then, like I said, I'd been playing around with the way the light comes through veneer, and this was a piece I'd cut beforehand. So I kind of wanted to expand on that in this video. I'm just going to put this behind a white background so you can kind of see the contrast a little bit better. I wanted to play around with some different designs I had been thinking about. So I have a test piece going because I want to get the settings for this particular laser right before ruining veneer. Now the veneer I'm cutting is actually a paper backed veneer. You can see it in my this bucket I have under my table saw. It's going to be a little bit thicker than the veneer I'm using, but the settings for it should work out pretty well. Now, as I've said before, you can buy all these files, which you'll see off of Etsy. You just want to make sure that they're available for, if you're planning on selling stuff for commercial use, which not all of them are, and some people have real weird rules and regulations, because until I can teach myself, which I've had no time, in order to start drawing some stuff myself, and the program you're going to use is a program like Illustrator, the free versions, Inkscape, you're kind of limited with what you can draw in Lightburn and what you can cut, because these laser cutters are mostly going to be cutting SVG files. I have been able to get it to cut simple PDFs and simple JPEGs, but you start to run into problems with depending on what you want to cut. So you can see I'm doing multiple test cuts, and once again, at this point I should have started screwing everything down when I noticed these lines were off, but I didn't, which is a lesson I already know, so shame on me for that. But you could see I'm perfecting just the settings, how fast it's going, and the power of the laser before I start cutting my final pieces. But like I said, I mean, this is really small, and you could see just all the fine detail that you can get with these. So after about 3 trial runs, I had those settings to where I thought they would work. And you could always tell by looking at the back if it's cutting through. The other problem with more organic material, and this is just an example of the veneer I'm getting online. It would be cheaper if I could find a source, not online, but that's just the veneer I'm using. I'm starting with the speed at 800 and the power at 40, and this is the file I'm going to start with, these skeleton leaves that I got off of Etsy. You can see they're fairly cheap. You just download them right to your computer, and you could upload them into the program and then cut them. But one of the problems you're going to realize if you're mainly cutting organic materials like I am, especially since plywood these days is not a consistent thickness, is that is going to translate to problems with the laser. So I've had a lot of issues, and this isn't the laser, this is the material, especially the veneer, because it bubbles because it's so thin, it will cut through perfectly in some spots and not others. So you really have to make sure that it's cut where you want it to be cut before you lift it off the machine, because getting it realigned is going to be really hard at that point. But I did find I have some of this tin tape. It's kind of similar to duct tape that they use for connecting ducts and HVAC work laying around the shop, and I've been using that to tape down the veneer, and that works really well, because obviously the honeycomb bed that I'm working on, which was from another company, another laser they gave me, is metal, so it sticks really well to that. So that has been working quite well. I'm sure duct tape would work as well too, but I usually don't have duct tape in the shop, believe it or not. But watching how these work is really cool. The engraving process goes north to south, but the cutting it kind of jumps all over the place, so it's fun to watch. So this was an example of one of the ones where it looked like it was through, but when you flip it over you could see it doesn't go all the way through. And then I did it again, and you could see the machine moved again. I was able to cut this out and save this leaf for something else, but an entire engraving could be messed up because the machine moves. So at this point was when I went through and I screwed everything down, which I honestly should have done from the beginning. I mean, like I said, it's still usable. These don't really have great ways to do that, so I just put some screws through the honeycomb bed, and then I just put some screws into my bed and clamped the legs of the piece to it. So then the next test cut was the one that went all the way through. It doesn't look like it, but sometimes you have to go through and poke some of those pieces out. And 80, the one that worked was, I ended up going 650 power. So once the leaf was working, I thought it'd be cool to try some maps. So I was able to find a map of Philly on Etsy. And this actually cut really cool. I like the way this looked a lot. I like maps in general. And I had to go back through because this has the lines you see, but then the detailing and the detail settings on the program were too small. So I had to go through and add those in, which is why you see it done in 2 rounds. It also is why you see that everything's a little bit off. The laser must not have realigned when I changed the settings, but I was pretty happy with the way the map looked. You could see this is, when you import these files, they're going to have it already preset for you. So usually, unless you know the speeds you want, I will test it with the files that are light burn imports. And like I said, this background was way too light. So I went through, there's the foreground on there with all the streets, and the background's kind of that gray color. So I put the map aside, and then I had also downloaded some anatomy. I forget what the listing was called. They're like antique anatomy drawings. I do really like this sort of stuff, and I thought that this could look cool on the laser engraver. And once again, I took a lot of photos of showing exactly how it cuts the stuff, because it's pretty mesmerizing to watch. And the nice thing about these, especially for someone like myself who has a business, I could have this machine cutting all day long while I'm working on other stuff, which is really cool. And then this one, it actually reminded me of lace. The way the light came through the drawing reminded me a little bit of lace. And then obviously holding them up to a light source will give you a better idea of how this light's going to come through, because the goal of this was to backlight these. But this file had multiple files in it, so I'm excited to try out with those. Now I needed a diffuser for this, because if you just use LEDs, they'll hurt your eyes. At least they hurt my eyes. The cheapest panel I could find was this $15. It goes over fluorescence, but it had bubbles on the back. I also have a thicker diffuser panel and this photo diffusing sheet, which I don't use for this because that thicker panel will get quite expensive. If this is something I potentially might sell down the line, you really want to consider how much you're spending. And then these puck lights I don't love LEDs, but you're not going to be able to find anything battery powered that will work as well as these LEDs. And I did a couple tests, which I won't bore you with, about how the right depth to have the LEDs away, and 2 lights seem to work the best for these size panels. If you only use 1 light, the edges of this veneer starts to get rather dark. So 2 lights, and I think these were about 3.5 inches away. If they're too close, it almost starts to look like a spotlight, and it doesn't light up the whole background. You could see the lights behind this panel on camera, but in real life it's a much more muted color. So the only one that didn't really work was the map. The lines, I would have to play around with the lines and get the cutting right in order for the map to look cool. But the leaves and the anatomy drawings actually turned out quite well. I was very happy with those. But at the same time, you don't have to turn these into lights. So I'm also going to make some picture frames for the ones that I didn't particularly like the way the light source looked. And that is what I'm starting to do here. I've never made picture frames out of plywood before, but once again, if this is something I might eventually start selling, hardwood gets really expensive, and I always have random size scraps that there's never really any use for. And the boxes with the lights have to be rather deep. So I'm making some really quick picture frames. I usually don't cut miters on the chop saw. They're never going to come out as perfect as the table saw, but it was the fastest way for me to cut these, and they actually turned out quite well. I was pleasantly surprised. I also will most likely stain these frames so you can get away with your miters not being as perfect. with those. And I'm going through this pretty quickly because I don't want this to be a picture frame how-to video. I already have one of those on my channel. But I just tape these together, put glue in those miters, and this blue tape is enough to hold these boxes like this that are this tall. You get a couple sections where you put the tape, which is quite nice. So I could glue up, I think I made like 6 of these and then 2 frames. I'm just going to check my diagonals to make sure everything is square. And then for the tops of these, I'm going to be using some oak to finish off the tops because I want a lip on the inside to hold everything in place. So that was kind of the thinking behind this. On the regular picture frames, I just finished the top with veneers. But because these are so deep, they don't really function the same way as a picture frame. So you can see this is about 7/8 of an inch and the box is about 3/4. There's going to be an 1/8 of an inch lip. On this one I've already glued up, you can see it. So then all of my, because I'm going to have the diffusing panel of sheet of plexi as well as the veneer in there, and that will hold everything from coming out the top side of the frame, obviously. So just set up a stop. I cut all these about as 32 of an inch oversized so that I could come in the next day and sand everything flush and make sure it'll look nice. But I just added some glue to this plywood and then trimmed out the top side of these thicker boxes. And then I could just tape everything in place and let everything set up overnight. So you can see that blue tape this blue tape is so handy in the shop. I go through it quite regularly. And the next day you could come in and take everything off. The blade I have on my saw I need to replace, so that's why there's a lot of burning on the outside of this. But I will just sand these quickly. Like I said, there is a lip to these. And then these are the frames I made. These are more like regular picture frames. So you can see there's a pretty heavy rabbet I cut on the inside. And then I just veneered the fronts. And like I said, I have a picture frame making video on the channel, so I'm not going to get too into depth, just show you basically what the end result is for those. And then I'm going to hand plane these as smooth as possible without cutting into the veneer of the plywood, and then finish them up with a hand sander. Now in the last video, one of my last videos, I was cutting plexi and I was doing it by hand and people recommended the table saw. I haven't had much success on the table saw. Not the table saw. I cut it once on the radial arm saw and it got a little choppy. But I tried it on the radial arm saw. It did work really well. My hands look very close to the blade there, but these are over 8 inches wide, those panels. So I wasn't super close to the blade. So I just cut this all down. All the plexi I cut down on the table saw. And I just made sure I had a piece of plexi and the diffuser for each one. The diffuser will act like a backer on the panels that won't have the lights. And then to keep everything in place, I'm just pressure fitting this inner frame. So that inner frame will hold everything in place, but it will also be a lip for the backer to attach to. Now on these thicker panels, I'm going to need thicker pieces, so I decided to use 1/4 inch material. And luckily I have lots of miscuts from the laser engraver, so life comes full circle. This is when I realized Luan was just not going to work. So I was able to rip that down, and you could see I'm just making an inner frame inside these boxes that it's about a 1/4 inch below the lip, so that this 1/4 inch backer I'm cutting for all of these fits into place. Now I also veneer the back side of the thicker boxes because those can be free floating, and I don't have it in the video, but this is an example of black stain on one of these. For the lights, very simple. The lights obviously screw off, so I just am attaching them to the backer with some screws. And then these work when you're facing towards them. In the intro, I was behind it, which was the problem. But when you're facing towards it, the remote controls work really well. So I clicked the wrong setting at first, but this is going to look very blown out in this video. In real life, the color's quite nice, and it's not as blown out as it looks like in the video. But I was pretty happy with how these turned out, especially the detailing. At some point, I moved the camera a little bit closer, and the light just comes through them quite nicely. Also, they look nice without them being lit, which is nice. And then I was playing around this with the miscut leaf. I just kind of had free floating without the veneer. Once again, it's going to look very blown out in the camera. but you could mess around with the colors and play around with the colors, and the marbling effect on that plastic wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So those are the light boxes I was playing around with. And then just the regular picture frames, even though they're not lighted, I like those as objects as well. I haven't decided how I'm going to finish the frames. Some of them I might keep clear, but that is basically going to be it for this video.